With many sharks entering multiple lineups with large bankrolls, small-time players are definite underdogs. But we're going to give you 7 tips and strategies so you can increase your odds at daily fantasy football. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Lee.
And I'm Gary Kurtzman. And, Eric, I'm excited about this show because, daily fantasy football, so DraftKings and FanDuel, have been taking off tremendously. And I think viewers are going to really appreciate and benefit from these tips. Why don't we...
let's get right into our 7 tips.
Right into it here. So first tip number 1, and this is a bit more of an obvious tip here, but gamble responsibly, people. Obviously DFS is gambling. You're going to want to make sure that for the entire season, you set the pool of cash that you are going to want to play and potentially lose, and then allocate it appropriately. There's guaranteed prize pool games and cash games. Cash games are the roughly 50-50 games. Although with sharks, the odds are probably a little less than that. Guaranteed prize pool is kind of like the lottery. Thousands of people play, you only have a 1% chance to win. Here's your rubric. If you're going to play the cash games, allocate about 10% of your total season-long pool for the cash games. If you're going to play GPP, allocate about 5% of your cash pool. Statistically speaking, even if you do have a run of bad luck, that should keep you solvent, keep you in the money throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people, what they do is they just basically play all the GPP tournaments, and by the 3rd or 4th week, they don't have any money. And so my suggestion is an 80-20 split between playing more cash games about 80% of the time. That'll fund, hopefully if it's any success, all you're playing in the GPP tournaments. Mm-hmm. So our second tip, in addition to our first tip that we gave on managing the bankroll, is take advantage of the lines makers. And they probably know more than anybody about what's going on in the NFL. And specifically look at the over and under. You're going to want to target games and get exposure to games that have high overs. For example, if Pittsburgh is playing New England, that's going to have a high over. They're going to expect a lot of points to be scored. So you want to look and try to get as many players from that game as possible. Antonio Brown may be too expensive, but look at Juju Smith-Schuster. Look at Chris Hogan and see if that can round up your lineup with guys like that.
I'm surprised how many people don't do that. How many people don't rely on the Las Vegas experts for the over-under, for the strategy you're talking about. Yeah. And also, and here's another tip where you can rely on the Vegas odds makers. It's as simple as looking to see who's favored. So I'll give you a breakdown here. If your team is favored by 6 or more points, then statistically speaking, running backs from that team are going to do materially better in those games than they will for the rest of the games of the season where they're favored by less than 6 points, or of course if they're underdogs. It's a very simple reason. When you get to the second half, and especially when you get this to the 4th quarter, if a team is up, what do? They run the ball. In fact, they run the ball nearly 70% of the time. That translates into more carries for your running back, more yards for your running back. Hey, if you get lucky and he breaks one, it'll even translate to more touchdowns. Very statistically significant. So look for picking running backs for teams that are favored to win by 6 or more points.
What about quarterbacks, Gary? How does that work?
Well, for quarterbacks, and I'll tell you what, let's talk about quarterbacks and let's talk about wide receivers.
Yeah.
Because really the corollary is more geared towards wide receivers, and that is, hey, if you're ahead and you're running the ball, what do you think you're doing if you're behind? You're throwing the ball. Well, that very same stat, if you're behind, you're running about 70% of the time. If you're ahead, you're throwing actually even a little bit more. If you're behind, you're throwing by even a little bit more than 70% of the time. That's more targets, going to translate into more catches, going to translate into more yards. Hey, and again, if you're lucky, it'll even translate into a garbage time 4th quarter touchdown for your receiver. Very statistically significant. So just like when you're behind with choose running backs, if your team is favored to lose, choose wide receivers.
Yeah, and for quarterbacks, you would think, therefore, you should pick quarterbacks from teams that are underdogs. Yeah.
No.
Very surprising, Eric.
Yeah, so because quarterbacks get most of their yardage or points from touchdowns, it's actually even. So you don't need to actually look to see if they're underdogs or favorites, because it's true that quarterbacks may throw the ball more and get more yardage who are underdogs. The favorites throw for more touchdowns, so it's about evens out. What doesn't even out is defenses. You want to get a defense from teams that are big favorites. Why? Because when teams are way up, the other team is going to throw the ball more. That'll lead to more sacks, more turnovers, more opportunities to even get lucky and get a interception return for a touchdown or a fumble.
That's right. Garbage time fourth quarter touchdowns count for a lot, but bear in mind, it's not just your offense that can score a touchdown, it's your defense can too, but only if the other teams are throwing the ball.
So the fourth tip is you want to make sure.
Let's get to the point.
You avoid the sharks. So when you are avoiding the sharks, that is critical, Gary, because sharks have the advantage. They have the advantage of time. They have the advantage of bankroll, and they have the advantage of technology. So don't worry about beating them. Just avoid them. And here's how you do it. Don't play head-to-head, especially posting. That sharks, Gary, can seek you out if you're posting on a head-to-head matchup.
So that's right. So we'll just talk very briefly, because we do cover this in another video. But for posting in any head-to-head game, you can either post, meaning you are telling FanDuel or DraftKings that you would like to play a head-to-head. Could they please find a partner for you? Sharks will find you like that, and I do mean like that. Why? Because they have programs that are already built into the site, and if you're a beginner, they'll know it because they see your history, and they will automatically latch onto your games, and you will almost guaranteed be facing a shark, which just the name sounds scary, and in fact it is, because they have all the technological and information advantage. You can do a little better instead of posting by accepting. That's the other thing you can do, where if somebody else posts, you have the decision to whether you want to join in the game or not, but you have no idea. There could be a shark too. So just save your money. Look, save your run of bad luck for someplace else. Just don't even bother with these head-to-head games.
Another way to avoid the sharks is in FanDuel, play the beginner contest. Look, in the beginner contest, no one who has won $2,500 is allowed. No one who's played over 50 contests is allowed. So you're not facing any sharks in that scenario. Another situation which you can do to avoid the sharks is it doesn't avoid them completely, but it mitigates them. Play single entry tournaments, Gary. That makes sure that if you have 500 people you're competing against, it's 500 unique competitors. Yeah,
because another thing the sharks do, aside from having all the computer programs and all the information that guys like you and I aren't privy to, they also can basically enter 500 to 1,000 entries at once. Something obviously we can't do unless we have sophisticated computer programs. Play something like this, Eric, with these tournaments, single entry, you've mitigated that risk. Obviously, if somebody can put 500 entries in, they're much more likely to win than guys like you and me who just put one. Okay. So it just makes perfect sense. So if we haven't scared you enough, if we haven't scared you off completely by talking about sharks and you still want to play DFS, here's the biggest tip we can give you. Here's tip number 5, and that is stacking. And now this applies more to GPP, guaranteed prize pool, than it does to head-to-head. But in a guaranteed prize pool, bear in mind one thing. Thousands of people enter the pool. Well, hundreds or thousands, depending. Only about 1 to 2% win. It's the lottery concept. So what do you need to do? You need to differentiate your lineup and jack up that volatility. There's only one way to do it, and that is pick members of the same NFL team on your roster. Don't just have a quarterback from an NFL team. Have a quarterback and a receiver and a tight end. And what you're banking on is that team's going to have a great offensive game. You're certainly banking on that. You're also banking that they're going to be throwing the ball, and specifically to your wide receivers. But I'll tell you what, is that a big gamble? Of course it is. Do you need a big gamble to win a game where you only have a 1 or 2% chance to win? Of course course you do. But if it works, if you guessed right and that quarterback throws touchdowns, multiple hopefully, to your one or two wide receivers, that stacking strategy means you are guaranteed double points on each of those connections, and that's what it takes to vault you ahead of everybody else. So if you just remember one thing from this video, remember that. Stack your lineup in guaranteed pass pool.
Another way to stack, in addition to the wide receiver, quarterback, or tight end and quarterback, is running back and defense. Because if you are telling a story if you're going to play tournaments, you're telling a story of what you think is going to happen. And if the story you think is that this defense is going to dominate this other team, then not only should you pick the defense, you should pick the running back. Because when that defense gets turnovers, when that defense stops that offense immediately, it turns it back over to your offense. And if they're ahead, they're going to be running the ball a lot.
Absolutely. More than one way to stack, and be creative with it. Just remember, stacking.
So more advice, number 6 on tournaments, is you want to be contrarian. And when I say contrarian, I don't mean you have to do crazy picks at every slot, but strategically be contrarian. And one of the ways that I like to do it is picking up questionable players. Now, I don't mean questionable in talent, questionable in injury status. Look, a lot of players will be listed now as questionable because they got rid of the probable tag. And you should do your research right up to game time. If you know that player is going to play, there are so many people, Gary, who play DFS, and they see a little Q next to that person's name, they're not going to play that player. So if that player does well, you have an advantage over a lot of people in that tournament.
And Eric, there are two things you said that I thought were really interesting. One, of course, is look at the questionable and see whether they're playing or not, because a lot of players that do DFS won't. But the other is use your late breaking news. Now, especially on DraftKings, they allow you to change your lineup split second before every game. So if it's 10:01, now you can't change your lineup for the morning games, obviously, because they've started. But for every player that you pick for Sunday afternoon games, you can still change. You can still look at 12:55 for any late breaking last minute information and change your lineup appropriately. And now I think that dovetails well to the 7th strategy, which is use your flex position judiciously, especially when it comes to late breaking news. So go ahead and put that flex position in the Monday Night Football lineup, assuming that you picked at least one player who's going to play Monday night. Whatever position they are, use that for your flex position, and here's why. Check back in on Monday afternoon. First of all, ask yourself the question, are you winning or are you losing? If you're winning, make sure that you use that flex position for a chalk player, a player that most people are going to choose and a player that you think is going to do well, because, hey, let's face it, if you're winning, you want to do what everybody else does, because that guarantees you're going to keep winning by the end of the game. Opposite is also true. If you are losing and you need a home run, you need a grand slam to win this game, swap out whatever player you had in that flex position on Monday Night Football for a player that most people don't have. Go ahead and go hog wild. Throw a tight end in that position, for crying out loud. Throw a third wide receiver, because what you want is that home run that nobody else has. Are the odds low of it hitting? Of course the odds are low of hitting a home run. But you need that kind of a gamble to vault yourself from way behind to ahead by Monday Night Football, and you can maximize your chances and your flexibility by making sure that that Monday Night Football position is a flex position.
So these were our 7 tips to make you successful in DFS. We want to hear from you in the comment section on YouTube. Are you applying these? Which of these are you not using and you're sure you're going to use in the future? And also, we'd love to hear in general whether you've been successful or not successful at DFS.
Absolutely. Comment on the video. Let's start a community. Let's help each other out. Also, if you like the video, and we certainly hope you do, go ahead and just click that like button. That tells us not only that you like the video, it'll increase the popularity in the search, and it'll help more people benefit from these videos as well.
And if you haven't yet, please hit the red subscribe button, and then you can hit the red bell, which gives you notifications whenever we do a video, because we're going to be doing videos on Wednesdays during the regular season, but we're going to do it even more often in the preseason. So until then, we will see you in the next video.
See you in the next video.
That's all, folks.